Have you ever wondered what happens when you paddle with more strokes per minute versus less strokes per minute? Do you paddle faster? Do you cover more distance? Does your heart rate increase? These are the types of questions we're going to answer in today's video as we compare the differences between a fast and a slow paddle stroke rate. If you guys are like me, you're always looking for ways to improve in your paddling performance, especially when it comes to your speeds. And one of the biggest things you can do in order to help you improve in your speeds is actually adjusting the amount of strokes you take per minute during your paddleboard sessions. So over the past week, I put together 2 days of testing in order to see what the difference was between 40 strokes per minute, 50 strokes per minute, and 60 strokes per minute were. And the 3 areas of data that I really wanted to see from each one of these tests was the difference in terms of overall speeds, the amount of distance I covered in the same amount of time, as well as the effects it had on my heart rate during each one of these paddle stroke sessions. So real quick, here's an overview of how each day of testing worked. On day 1, I went out to paddle for 20 minutes in each one of these stroke rates. So that means I went to paddle for 20 minutes in 40 strokes per minute, 50 strokes per minute, and 60 strokes per minute. Along with this, I also made sure that I paddled the same route with each one of these strokes. So what I did is I went out paddling for 10 minutes out with 40 strokes per minute, then I turned around and paddled back 10 more minutes at 40 strokes per minute. Then I did the same thing for 50 strokes and for 60 strokes as well. I also did this testing on a lake to help ensure there was no current or tidal change to make sure the testing grounds were an even playing field for each day of testing as well. Another thing I did to help ensure I was paddling at the right strokes per minute was I actually put on a pair of headphones and listen to a metronome and simply set that metronome to the right beat I should be paddling at for each segment, whether it was a 40 strokes per minute, 50 or 60 strokes per minute. And then lastly, I used the NK Speed Coach to record all my data to see what the results were after these 2 days of testing. Review after the 2 days of testing is my average speeds in each one of the strokes per minute categories. On day 1, I actually did the 40 strokes per minute category at the beginning of my training day. So I did 20 minutes paddling in the 40 strokes per minute. And then I took a little bit of break and I did the 50 strokes per minute. And then I did the 60 strokes per minute. Then on day 2, I actually reversed the order. So I started with 60, then went to 50, and then I went down to 40. So the reason I did that was in order to see what effects also had on my body in terms of being more fatigued or not after doing the full day of testing. So the first day, as I said, I started off doing the 40 strokes per minute. Then on the second day of testing, I ended with the 40 strokes per minute in order to get a better average between the 2 days of testing for what my average speeds were during the 20 minutes. So taking a look at this graph from my first day of testing, we can see that I stayed right around the 40 strokes per minute mark during my entire 20 minutes of paddling on the water. Now there is a little bit of ebb and flow obviously because when I switch sides with my paddle blade, for example, on the side of my paddle board, there is a little bit of drop here and lag as I take that time to switch sides with my paddle blade. Then obviously towards the middle mark right here, we can see there's a big change in paddle strokes because that's when I'm doing a pivot turn in the water or to get turned around and return to the starting point where I started 10 minutes earlier. So on this graph here, we can see down the bottom we have the time here. On the right side, we have the strokes per minute, so right around that 40 strokes per minute mark. And on the right hand side, we're currently looking at the miles per hour. So in a second here, I'll also give you the kilometers per hour for an average also. This first day, we can see I stayed kind of right around as an average of this 5 miles per hour mark as I'm paddling on the water. Now on this day, there was a little bit of the breeze. So as I kind of go around the breeze, then a more protected corner and then turn around and come back into the breeze, that definitely did affect my speed a little bit too when I was on the water, which is why we're seeing some fluctuation right here in the speed as I'm being affected by the wind during that paddle session also. On day 2, we can see similar results. So once again, 40 strokes per second or per minute on the bottom part of the graph here, and the top part, once again, kind of hovering right around that 5 miles per hour mark once again. So after those 2 days of testing at paddling at 40 strokes per minute at an average speed of 5 miles per hour or 8.04 kilometers per hour. All right, now let's jump over to the results from the 50 strokes per minute from both days of testing. And as I said earlier, on both days of testing, I did the 50 strokes per minute right in the middle of the testing day. So day 1, I did a 40, 50, 60. And then day 2, I did a 60, 50, 40. So both days, 50 strokes per minute were done right in the middle of the testing day. Going back to the charts right here, we can see I was paddling at 50 strokes per minute during the 20-minute paddle session. So once again, doing a pivot turn right in the middle of the session. And then up here, we can see my average in miles per hour throughout the entire time on the water as well. Then day 2, very similar. Once again, paddling right around 50 strokes per minute. And then once again, my speed was hovering right around this area during my entire session on the water. Now, as day 2, we can see the wind did affect me a little bit more on the going out and the return in terms of my average speeds on the water also. So when it came to me paddling at 50 strokes per minute, I had an average speed of 5.5 miles per hour or 8.85 kilometers per hour. So when you compare that data with the 40 strokes per minute data, we can see we gained 0.5 miles per hour in our average speeds, which is pretty good. So lastly, when it comes to our average speeds, let's see what the results were from our 60 strokes per minute from the 2 days of testing. Going back to our chart here, once again, we can see paddling right around 60 strokes per minute and had my speed averages up here, hovering right around this point throughout the entire paddle session. Then on day 2, same thing once again, right around 60 strokes per minute. Then up here, had an average speed right around this point as well while I was paddling on the water. So when it comes to comparing the results of the 2 days of testing at paddling at 60 strokes per minute, had an average speed of 6 miles per hour or 9.65 kilometers per hour. So once again, we gained another 0.5 miles per hour in our average speeds, which is, as I said earlier, is so good. So it's really cool looking at that data right here. As you can see, as we increase our stroke by 10 strokes per minute every single round, we gain 0.5 miles per hour in our average speeds, which is incredible. All right, now let's dive into what my overall distance covered was in the 20 minutes I paddled for in the water in each one of these strokes per minute categories. So starting off in day 1 in the category of 40 strokes per minute, I had a total distance coverage of 1.69 miles. Then on day 2, I had a total distance coverage of 1.67 miles. So when we take the average from those two numbers, we get an average distance covered of 1.68 miles or 2.7 kilometers in that 20-minute paddle session. When it comes to the 50 strokes per minute, I was able to cover a distance of 1.82 miles during that first day of testing. Then on day 2, I was able to cover 1.78 miles for the 20-minute paddle session. So with those two numbers, I had an average of 1.8 miles or 2.9 kilometers for that 20-minute paddle session. Then lastly, as we take a look at the 60 strokes per minute, on day 1, I was able to cover 1.84 miles. And on day 2, I was able to cover 1.95 miles. Now, the reason there's a little bit of difference between these two distances on the 2 days of paddling at 60 strokes per minute is on the day 1 of testing, when I was doing my pivot turn to turn around, I actually got a little bit off balance and fell on top of my paddleboard. So that caused me to be a little bit slower at getting back up and turned around and continuing on my paddle session for the remaining 20 minutes. So that's why there's a little bit more of a difference in terms of overall distance covered between those 2 days of testing. But nonetheless, the average between those 2 days was 1.9 miles or 3.06 kilometers in that 20 minutes paddle session. So pulling up all these stats right here after these 2 days of testing, we can see that 40 strokes per minute gave me a total distance average of 1.68 miles or 2.7 kilometers. And then at 50 strokes, it was 1.8 miles, 2.9 kilometers. And then 60 strokes per minute, it was 1.9 miles or 3.06 kilometers. So looking at these stats right here, we can definitely see there is an increase in the amount of distance you can cover in the same amount of time by increasing your strokes per minute rate while paddleboarding on the water. So even though we're starting to see that by increasing our strokes per minute, we're also increasing our average speeds and the amount of distance we can cover paddling on the water, that doesn't mean there's an effect of that by having a toll on our body at paddling at those different stroke rates per minute. So one of the things I also want to record and track during these paddle sessions was to see what my heart rate levels were at while I paddled at 40 strokes per minute and 50 strokes per minute and 60 strokes per minute. So going back to day 1 here, we can see when I paddled at 40 strokes per minute, had an average heart rate of 153 beats per minute. Then on day 2, I had an average heart rate of 145 beats per minute. You'll kind of see this as a theme through both days of testing because on day 2, it was a little bit cooler out, probably about 5 degrees cooler. So that kind of helped my body stay cooler also, which allowed me to maintain a little bit lower heart rate in comparison to day 1 of testing. When it came to day 1 of testing at 50 strokes per minute, I had an average heart rate of 168 beats per minute. Then on day 2, I had an average heart rate of 162 beats per minute. Then lastly, as we looked at stats from paddling at 60 strokes per minute on day 1, I had an average heart rate of 175. And on day 2, I had an average of 169. So from those stats, we can see I had an average heart rate of 148 beats per minute when I paddled at 40 strokes per minute. Then I had an average heart rate of 165 beats per minute at 50 strokes per minute. And lastly, I had an average heart rate of 172 beats per minute when I paddled at 60 strokes per minute. So basically taking a look at this data right here, you can definitely tell that there is a limit in terms of the amount of strokes you can take per minute when you paddleboard on the water. For example, if you're going for an hour paddle session, if you paddle at 80 strokes per minute, for example, and your heart rate is maxing out, you definitely cannot maintain that max heart rate for an hour paddle session, as that just simply is not possible. So in order to reduce that heart rate level, we have to bring our strokes per minute back down again in order to get our heart rate in the right zone to last an hour-long paddle session on the water for. Likewise, if you're doing a sprint paddle session, since you're paddling for a shorter period on time in the water, you definitely can do a higher strokes per minute mark because even though your heart rate is rising up to your max levels, you're only paddleboarding for about a minute long on the water for maybe a sprint paddleboard race. So with all that being said, your goal is really to find that sweet spot when you're paddling the most strokes per minute that you can possible in the right heart rate zone. So for example, if your goal is to paddle a 10K race in zone 4, you should really work on trying to see how many strokes per minute you can take while maintaining a zone 4 level heart rate. Now obviously you can improve both of these areas over time and with training as you improve your cardio fitness, and with that you'll be able to take more strokes per minute in the heart rate zone level. So with that being said, along with all the information I shared in today's video, I hope that you can see that by increasing your strokes per minute will increase your average speeds and even your max speeds as a paddler. So if you are interested in learning more about some exercises you can do both on the water and off the water in order to help you increase your strokes per minute rate, leave me a comment down below and let me know if that's something you'd be interested in. That's it for today's video though. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I'll catch you guys in the next one.